Go ahead and turn with me to Hosea chapter 2. We're going to make a couple stops in the Old Testament before we move to John chapter 11. I may have said Hosea chapter 2, but I definitely meant Hosea chapter 6. Hold your place there because we'll hit Ezekiel chapter 37. But we're going to hang out in the announcements for a little while. So get ready to retention mode. It's going to be some information. First, let me start by saying that the flowers that we have today are in memory of our beloved Chris McVeigh, affectionately known as Bubba Mac. I know he meant so much to us, our church, faithful servant, and so we're thankful for that today. And in light of that, we think about what we've just celebrated in Veterans Day, and I know we have at least one here. If you are a veteran, would you mind standing that we may recognize you? Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you. It means a lot to us that our men have served us faithfully in order for us to be able to have days like today. And so I do thank you. I thank you for serving us. As we think about all that God has gifted us through those who have gone before us, those who have served us, for us to be able to meet in this room together today, I want us to feel the love, camaraderie, enjoy just being with one another. And that's kind of where we are in that season. And with this season is going to come a few things, and I'm going to mention those. But let me not forget to mention our Hope Outdoors meeting tonight. If you're familiar with that, we're going to meet tonight after the evening service in the back. We're going to have you something to eat, and Will Chafin and his dad's going to be here with us tonight, right, to explain some things. I'm putting Allie on the spot. Yes, I think that's the plan. Yes. Right. Not my house. That's not how my kids work. They would want mama. So that speaks volumes to Will Chafin. Let's just... and apparently paints me in a bad light. But they're going to walk through what that will look like for us when we get to that moment. So if you're interested in helping with that ministry, which will be after the first of the year, come with us tonight, get some information. If you figure out it's not a great fit for you, you've gotten to eat some pizza with us anyway. So join in with us for that tonight. With that, we are going to be moving here in a couple weeks into the Christmas season. Are y'all prepared for that? I was not prepared for it to be November, but here we are. I've got to get very thankful before the next couple weeks so I can meet those needs in my life. But I am very excited about our Christmas season and how we're going to kick that off, Brother Michael. Are you still excited about how we're going to kick that off? He is. He's nodding yes, because we have made it a little part of our Sunday night dynamic to have a fifth Sunday singing, but we make the rules as we go around here. So what we decided is the first Sunday in December is going to be our fifth Sunday singing, and we are going to kick it off by singing Christmas songs that first Sunday night in December. So please make note to be with us that night so we can just celebrate what the Lord has done for us. With that being said, today is Shoebox Day. And if you have not gathered for a shoebox, what's the timeline on how much time we have left to get that to you, Cody? This week. But in light of that, what we do, there are shoe boxes in the front. You can see pictures of the lives that this ministry affects, that these shoe boxes are packed with the intention of giving a small child somewhere in the world a Christmas gift, but attached with that will come the message of the gospel. And so what we anticipate through that is for us to reach the world through Liberty Baptist Church. Now, that might seem like high standards, but that's the goal that we set forth, that when we pack these shoe boxes, it's going to go to a legitimate person in our world that will receive that and hear the gospel. So that is super. It's amazing that we get to participate in a part of that. So be a part of that. So if you have not done that yet, go ahead and take a shoebox, get it back to us this week. And along that note, here we go. Let's have some family time. Y'all ready for this? You ready to sink your teeth in? I feel like that this is a very special announcement that I get to make, what we plan and intend to do. Now, since I've been pastor, we've obviously taken up Lottie Moon, Annie Armstrong, but it's been the intention of the previous pastor that would go directly to a missionary. And with that being said, we've kind of been fuzzy the last couple of years of where we intend for that to go, and we have some clarity now with the intentions of Joseph and Carissa moving their ministry to Montana. Now, with them, I spent a lot of time this week. I told Joseph, I said, I've talked about you more this week than I've talked about anybody before in my life, because I got the opportunity to sit down with Brother Daryl Brunson, and he and I sat down with some pastors. We did that on Monday. On Tuesday, we sat together with some pastors trying to build a network for the Smileys. What they will do is seek partnership with other churches to achieve their goal of preaching and teaching the gospel in Montana. So while there are many questions along the way of what exactly that's going to look like, I'm very excited to ask Liberty Baptist Church to partner with Joseph and Carissa as we take our Lottie Moon Christmas offering this year. Normally goes to World Missions, but I feel like this holds a special place in our heart to give towards the Smileys, to kind of be the ground floor of them seeking to achieve that goal and moving to Montana next year. Again, we've got to gain some clarity on some things, but this week, some of the encouraging things that I was able to hear about ministry in Montana and what that looks like for new church planners that are signing up to move into that environment, how they'll be trained, and how God's using those people, men and women, to establish a foundation in Montana that we just don't have here in the South. Talking about a town of 8,500 that has a couple churches in it. And we think about all the churches that we have right around us. And so that's what we're partnering with. Yes, we're partnering with the Smileys, but also partnering with what God is doing in Montana, because he seems to be churning up some folks and taking them to Montana from Alabama, particularly Clark and Marengo County. So we get to be a part of this process as well. So I would just ask you to be. We've got a little over a month. We'll take that up on December the 18th. But I would just ask you to ask the Lord, what are you seeking, Lord, for me to give in terms of this mission? Now, as we think about that, we think about the shoe boxes. I'm going to ask Cody if you would go to the Lord in prayer, particularly for the shoe boxes, but also for the Smileys as we seek the Lord through this time. Thank you so much. Hosea chapter 6. We really want to look at verse 2. Then we're going to move to Ezekiel chapter 37. Be on the lookout for that, because then we're going to land in John chapter 11. I shared with you a few weeks ago when we were at the time we were having our fall festival that I grew up in a household as a Southern Baptist preacher's kid, that there were just certain things we could not do, certain things that we could enjoy, certain things that were just off the table. Let me just go ahead and share something. Oh, in my disobedient heart, there was something that I was just not allowed to do. And that was watch wrestling, okay? And as a fourth and fifth grader, there was nothing more than I wanted to watch than wrestling. Now, let me explain a few things. Again, as a Southern Baptist preacher's kid whose dad said, "No, we're not watching wrestling in our house." There was Monday night and Thursday night where it was all that I could do just to get a glimpse of what was going on in wrestling, because it meant a lot to me in my mind then. And as I've grown older, I find it so interesting because some of you may have to plug your ears on this. The show is fabricated. Are y'all aware of that? That wrestling is it's fabricated. What's that, Miss Marilyn? I'm sorry. Fake. It is fake. Well, and I've mentioned that. It's famous for our dear friend Aaron Harrell to say when it's brought up that it's fake. Because I spent some time watching it over at the Harrell's house. It was as a teenager he didn't care anymore, but as a fourth and fifth grader. But our dear friend Aaron Harrell, he says, "You can't fake gravity, Miss Marilyn." That's what he would say. But it's pretty fake. As I've grown older, I appreciate how there's a plan behind the scenes, and they do their best, although we're not buying it for 1 second. They do their best to make it look pretty real, do they not? Again, like you can't fake gravity. They're going to jump off ladders and slam people onto tables and do all these things on wrestling, Monday night, Thursday night. But behind the scenes, that story and the way things are supposed to go, there's a plan of what's supposed to take place. Except this is the really the only gravity, that we know things are set and they're final when the bell rings. Isn't that when it's pretty much over? When the bell rings. Now, there's a whole lot of chaos before, there's a whole lot of things happening after, but when the bell rings, we have some finality. As I was reminded this week, there was a situation in the story, and one of the plots that was thickening in the wrestling match, that what was taking place was something happened behind the scenes where someone was supposed to win and it was supposed to go a certain way, but they went behind that other person's back and they took it from that person, and he was upset. So even in this planned out thing, there's some manipulation to the plan. Don't you love a good plan? Do y'all make plans in your life? Have you ever had a plan in your life that just didn't go the way that you expected it to go? Have you had struggle giving up on that plan? Have you had times in your life where you asked the Lord why He didn't allow things to just work the way that they were supposed to? It's difficult. It's difficult when the plan doesn't go our way. I think about where we are. Auburn fans, just please don't beat up on me too bad, but as an Alabama fan, I just wonder what the plan is sometimes during the football games right now. And I told Whitney yesterday, I said, I'm not going to care about this more than the coaches care about it. I have to make that barrier that I'm not going to care about it more than they do. They got a plan, they got to implement it, and I'm not going to care about it more than they do. And we pulled out a win, but a couple weeks ago, or last week, man, it seems like so long ago that LSU threw that pass into the end zone in overtime, and there was finality. Whatever I thought should happen, whatever the plan was, whoever was supposed to win, there was finality in overtime in that moment. Now, we're going to talk about Lazarus here in just a minute, and Lazarus goes into overtime, all right? It's not what we're used to. It's not what we expect. But as we look at the I am statements, understanding the sufficiency of God in our life, we are going to look at the I am statement, how Jesus describes Himself. I am the resurrection and the life. Not that I can do resurrection or have the ability to resurrect or I can give life. He says that He is the resurrection and He is the life. Now that shows us our trajectory, that we are moving in the direction not to settle for experiences in our life, not to settle for our own plan, but to experience the Lord and all He has meant for us to see, know, and understand. Really easy for me to preach, not as easy for me to implement into my life. And that's where faith has to take root, has to take hold, and has to push me in the direction of understanding Jesus as sufficient to meet each and every one of my needs. We've been doing this now where we see a development in the Old Testament. And we see Jesus come on the scene and say, I am the fulfillment of this that was developing in the Old Testament. We think about taking those Polaroid pictures. We got Polaroid cameras last year for Christmas, and you know what you do? You got to shake it as it becomes clearer. You look at the picture and the image that you have taken. And so as the picture is taken in the Old Testament, we see it as it shakes out that Jesus is the fulfillment. It becomes clearer over time that He is everything that we expect coming from the Old Testament. That picture becomes clearer and clearer, and these I am statements are pointing directly as the picture becomes abundantly clear. He is pointing for us to understand Him as the Messiah, the one who is going to come and bring restoration. Now, in our previous discussions, we've talked about how He is coming as Messiah, and there is this expectation, and they have moved into exile where they were removed from the promised land because of their disobedience, and in exile they awaited the one that was to bring restoration, the one who was to put the pieces back together, to restore Israel, who had even split among themselves because they couldn't get along. And what we see here in the previous weeks, Jesus has made it abundantly clear as He said, I am the bread of life. We understand Him represented in the manna from heaven that the Lord provided for His children in the wilderness. Jesus says, I am the light of the world against the backdrop of the Festival of Booths, where He establishes Himself revealed from the cloud by day and the fire by night as He led the children of Israel in the wilderness. He says, I am the door to the sheepfold. I am the good shepherd. What we saw last week, that even though leaders, as we saw in Ezekiel 36, even though leaders had neglected their responsibility to lead the nation of Israel, He says, I will come and do this myself. Christ comes to personally lead us. And now what we want to do is to begin to see the development of Jesus as the resurrection and the life. We understand that Israel, in its expectation of the Messiah, was going to put the pieces back together. There was an idea of resurrection with this theme of exile, that He was going to bring about redemption for the people. We see as Hosea is prophesying in chapter 6, verse 1, come let us return to the Lord, for He has torn us that He may heal us. He has struck us down, and He will bind us up. After 2 days, He will revive us. On the third day, He will raise us up, that we may live before Him. We have these statements echoing through Old Testament history where they find their result in Jesus Christ. Let's move to Ezekiel chapter 37. Right after the discussion that Ezekiel has concerning the leaders of Israel, he's going to have this revelation from the Lord in chapter 37, which is going to give us some indication of what their expectation was as the Lord would put the pieces back together. Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 1, the hand of the Lord was upon me, and He brought me out in the spirit of the Lord and set me down in the middle of the valley, and it was full of bones. And He led me around among them, and behold, there were very many on the surface of the valley, and behold, they were very dry. And He said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? That's an interesting question. We're going to have another interesting question in just a moment. But as you look at the landscape of your life, maybe you're dealing with some brokenness this morning. Maybe there's an aspect of your life that you're unwilling to give in response to the Lord and what He's calling you to do. and you look and you see the dry bones, we're reminded in this story as Ezekiel shares this with us for us to know and understand that it is within the nature of God to put the pieces back together, to bring about resurrection in our lives spiritually. And as we understand in the story of Lazarus that what he is eventually to do is that we experience resurrection as he has experienced resurrection, that we may be with him forever. Ezekiel's reminding us of this as we look at the landscape of our life and we see very dry bones. We're reminded of this, that the Lord restores. And I answered, O Lord, you know. Verse 4, then he said to me, prophesy over these bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God to these bones, behold, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live. And I will lay sinews upon you, and will cause flesh to come upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live. And you shall know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied there was a sound, and behold, a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to its bone. And I looked, and behold, there were sinews on them, and flesh had become upon them, and skin had covered them, but there was no breath in them. And he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, son of man, and say to the breath, thus says the Lord God, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe on these slain that they may live. We understand this in Ezekiel's time as responding to the exile in Israel's history. And we know as we look forward to Jesus, the fulfillment of the resurrection, that the spiritual destruction that has wreaked havoc upon our lives, the pieces may be put back together because he is the resurrection. He is the life that we desire. Verse 10, so I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they lived and stood on their feet, an exceedingly great army. Then he said to me, son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is lost. We are indeed cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, thus says the Lord God, behold, I will open your graves and raise you from your graves, O my people. I will bring you into the land of Israel, and you shall know that I am the Lord. When I open your graves and raise you from your graves, O my people, and I will put my spirit within you, and you shall live, and I will place you in your own land. Then you shall know that I am the Lord. I have spoken, and I will do it, declares the Lord. Let's move to John chapter 11, New Testament book, Gospel of John chapter 11, verse 1. The Lord has declared from cover to cover that his intention is to bring life out of death. He has established from cover to cover that in your brokenness and in your inability, he is sufficient to provide salvation for you. Now, that plan may not go always as we see fit. As we have a desire and we want to see things work out a certain way, our lives don't, if ever, work that way. And we're reminded of this as there was a situation that has come about with some of Jesus' friends. As our first point this morning, we want to see in the first few verses of John chapter 11 that Jesus' plan outweighs our perception. Whatever's supposed to be going on according to our brain, Jesus' plan is bigger than whatever our perception is. That's what we want to see in this first section as we look at chapter 11, verse 1. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. Jesus' plan is bigger, whatever their perception is of what should be taking place. Verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So Jesus is very well aware He has a very personal relationship. And now what we're going to see as this story progresses and it moves forward, that there is some adjustment to his plan that Mary and Martha see that needs to be fixed in this. Jesus, we're close to you. Jesus, we love you. Jesus, if you were just here, we've seen you heal the blind. We've heard the stories of you feeding the 5,000. If you would have just been here with us, their perception was not giving Jesus special faith and understanding in being exactly who he is. We're going to see this as it progresses. Verse 6, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. Jesus' plan is being implemented. Their perception is not relying on Jesus' plan, and he's going to show them exactly who he is. Verse 12, the disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. We see this across the Gospel of John where there's regularly this misunderstanding of Jesus' words as he's speaking to now even physically death, but there's going to be a spiritual component of this that's supposed to capture our attention, but they're even looking, not even fully trusting in his ability to raise from the dead. If he's fallen asleep, he'll recover. Verse 13, now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus plainly says, no, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may... What's John's intention for us as we read this? Surface level, like we've been talking about in the Sunday school lesson? Not on the surface. Deep, relational, experiential, who Jesus is. He says, I've done this that you may believe. Now, this gives us some insight then, as we've discussed the miracles before, that Jesus has the ability to meet each and every need. So when we say, Jesus, why have you not done this? Or Jesus, why have you done this for others? The intention of Jesus at work is to move hearts towards belief in him. So when we see that our plan isn't going the way that we had planned, we must trust that his plan, not our perception, is ruling and reigning, and we must submit that it must be a step that we must take towards him as sufficient for us and sufficient to meet our needs. So don't we love it when Thomas shows up? We talk bad about him, but I think we identify with him a little bit. So Thomas called the twins, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with them. If they're in stoning business, I guess we're all just going to go and have this same fate with Jesus. A little negative, but a little maybe based in reality. Maybe he's not just doubting Thomas. Maybe he's realistic Thomas sometimes, where he says, whatever this is, whatever we're doing, let's go be about it. So now we want to see, as we move into verse 17, that Jesus' promise outweighs our pessimism. We see his pessimism, Thomas's pessimism coming up, the lack of faith with the disciples. We see Mary and Martha's reaction. We must understand that his promise outweighs our pessimism in that he doesn't necessarily need our opinion. That as he calls us in faith, we come in surrender. Now, when Jesus came in verse 17, he found Lazarus has already been in the tomb 4 days. You know any songs about that, Miss Martha Jo? I bet you do. Lazarus, he'd been counted out. They did the 3 count on Lazarus, and he was done. But now Lazarus is going to get some overtime here in a minute. 18. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, listen to her pessimism, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So there's still this element of finality with death that those around Jesus haven't fully come to terms with who he is and what his intention is in establishing himself as Messiah. And the answer that God has brought into perspective to fix the brokenness around them. They say, Lord, if you had just been here. Verse 22, but even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. So there is this at this particular point in time and through the Old Testament giving credence to the idea of what is to come with the Lord bringing about resurrection in the last day. But what the Lord is establishing here is that his plan and his promises are for today. He says this to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. We see that spiritual connection and that spiritual component for those of us who know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior in this room, that we have experienced spiritual resurrection in our life. We were like those dry bones, and he's called us to live again spiritually. And that is a stamp and a seal on the promise that we're going to live with him through bodily resurrection for eternity. That is the good news. That the finality that we expect and we understand in this life is not up to us and our plan and our perception, but we lay it at the feet of Jesus, that we trust and we believe what you say is true, and we will experience resurrection just as you experienced resurrection. This is the picture he's painting. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. And then he asks this very important question, which is the important question that all of us in this room must address in our life. As we were discussing in Sunday school when we were talking about different generations, different perceptions for different generations, we were talking about maybe some of your grandparents, it was taught to them because of the era that they grew up in. It was an emphasis upon them that you have to clean your plate before you get up from the dinner table. And I said, in my generation, we're not necessarily worried about those things, but it was implanted in us to recycle and to be green. And then we wonder, because we experience those things in school, right? TV. We wonder why things go in certain directions for positive or negative, whatever side of the aisle you line up on, right? That we're fed these ideas, and then it comes out from us. And one of the distinctions that I made with the baby boomers, if I may be so bold as to address, is that there is much faith in the expert, in the white coat. That maybe some millennials in this room have a little bit of doubt, because we've grown up with the Google all of our lives. And anybody's told us anything, we've said, well, I'm going to have to check this out by Google. You understand what I mean? But before, pre-Google, the white coat, the expert, what they said with authority was king. And now, Jesus is addressing this question. Are we going to trust him as the expert? As he says this, he says, I am the resurrection, I am the life. Do you believe that for your own life today? Not what Jesus can do for others, not what Jesus has done, but what is Jesus to you? When Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life, what does that mean to you as he looks and he says to Martha, do you believe? Jesus is addressing that same question in each and every one of our hearts this morning. Not on the surface. Deep, intimate connection. What did Martha say? What was her response? Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. If we just make that short and sweet, I believe you are exactly who you say you are. Verse 28, and then he said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord... Jesus is showing a lot of patience here, right? There's got to be a just wait with Jesus. If you had just been here, my brother would not have died. Her pessimism was outweighing Jesus' promise. Verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled, and he said, where have they laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And Jesus wept, showing us, as Jesus is taking these steps and he's walking through his earthly ministry, he's not just haphazardly going around raising people from the dead. He's not haphazardly sprinkling miracles all around just so people can have a good day. Jesus weeps because he is deeply invested into bringing restoration. And as this points in a family that he genuinely cared about, that he had genuine relationships with, even in their pessimism and their lack of faith and their not understanding, and all this exhibited also by the disciples, even in all this, Jesus is moved to tears because of his desire to establish that all may see exactly who he is. Verse 36, so the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? And this is where we've got to settle this day as we close. In the last few verses that we have together this morning, Jesus' power outweighs our problem. Whatever it is, though we may feel like there is no escape, though we may feel like there is no light at the end of the tunnel, while we may feel in our own personal wrestling match that we've got 2 counts in and that hand is about to fall for the third and the bell's going to ring, that our problem is no match for who Jesus is. By Brother William's word? No, from Jesus' word. Look at what he says. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. And Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. When he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lazarus had a big problem. Huge problem. But it was not final because Jesus had the last word.